Ma'am, first class is for paying passengers, not for people looking for an empty seat. The sentence echoed through the quiet cabin with enough volume to make every nearby conversation disappear. A dozen heads turned at once. Coffee cups paused halfway to waiting hands. Laptop screens were lowered just enough for curious eyes to peek over them. Standing in the aisle without the slightest sign of embarrassment was Vanessa Brooks, a 41-year-old black woman wearing a simple navy blazer over a plain white blouse, dark tailored pants, and comfortable leather flats. There were no designer handbags announcing wealth, no expensive jewelry catching the overhead lights, no assistant following behind with a tablet full of meetings. She carried only a small black travel bag and a boarding pass between her fingers. Across from her stood the lead flight attendant, a white woman whose perfectly pressed navy uniform reflected years of discipline and competence. Her posture was straight, her smile professional, yet her eyes revealed something different. They were filled with certainty before a single fact had been confirmed. Vanessa glanced calmly at the boarding pass, then back at the flight attendant. "My assigned seat is 2 Alpha, she answered in a steady voice. The flight attendant barely looked at the document. "There has to be a mistake. Economy is through that curtain." She pointed toward the rear of the aircraft as though directing someone who had wandered into the wrong room. Vanessa remained exactly where she was. She had spent decades walking into rooms where people quietly questioned whether she belonged. Boardrooms. Investment conferences. Private clubs. International summits. She had learned long ago that dignity often spoke louder than anger. A businessman seated beside the aisle leaned toward his colleague with a smirk. "Every flight has one," he whispered just loudly enough for several passengers to hear. A few uncomfortable laughs followed. Others avoided eye contact, pretending to scroll through their phones while listening to every word. An elderly woman near the window slowly folded her newspaper, sensing this was becoming something far more serious than a seating question. "Ma'am," the flight attendant continued, "we cannot delay boarding because you are confused about your ticket." Vanessa gently extended the boarding pass. "Perhaps we should read it before deciding. I am confused." The flight attendant accepted it with visible reluctance, glanced at the seat number for less than a second, then handed it back almost immediately. "Please step aside while we help you locate your actual seat." Vanessa accepted the boarding pass without protest. "You have not verified anything." The reply was quiet enough that only those closest could hear, yet the words settled heavily throughout the cabin. A younger flight attendant standing several rows behind watched the exchange with growing uncertainty but remained silent. The boarding line stopped moving. Passengers waiting in the jet bridge stretched their necks, trying to understand why no one was entering the aircraft. Outside the windows, baggage crews continued loading luggage beneath the bright afternoon sun, completely unaware that inside the first-class cabin, a different kind of inspection had already begun. Vanessa looked around the cabin for only a moment. Every expression told its own story. Curiosity. Doubt. Judgment. Indifference. She had seen them all before. What none of them knew was that this trip had never been about reaching another city. Long before she stepped onto the aircraft, she had already decided that today she would discover whether the complaints she had quietly received about unequal treatment were isolated incidents or symptoms of something much larger. Standing only a few feet from seat 2 Alpha, Vanessa realized she had found her answer far sooner than she expected, and before the next 5 minutes were over, a single decision would begin changing far more than one passenger's journey. Vanessa Brooks did not move. She simply stood beside the entrance to the first-class cabin with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and no reason to rush. The lead flight attendant interpreted that silence as resistance instead of certainty. "Ma'am, delaying the boarding process is not going to change your seat assignment," she said firmly. Vanessa looked at her with calm eyes. "Neither will deciding where I belong before checking the facts." The sentence was delivered without anger, yet it lingered through the cabin longer than any raised voice could have. The flight attendant folded her arms. She had already reached a conclusion, and in her mind the conversation was merely catching up to it. Vanessa had expected moments like this before leaving home that morning. That was exactly why she had chosen a navy blazer that looked elegant but ordinary, comfortable flats instead of designer heels, and a small carry-on bag instead of luxury luggage. Her executive assistant had offered to arrange a private terminal arrival, but Vanessa declined. Her security detail had been instructed to remain behind. Even the airline's executive liaison believed she had postponed her trip until the following week. Every choice had been intentional because she wanted to experience the airline exactly as thousands of ordinary travelers did every day. Over the previous several months, confidential reports had quietly reached her office. Some described exceptional service, while others told a different story. Passengers claimed they had been questioned more often because of their appearance. Several reported being asked repeatedly to prove they belonged in premium cabins despite holding valid boarding passes. Internal reviews labeled each complaint as a misunderstanding. Vanessa had spent her career building companies by trusting evidence rather than convenient explanations. That was why she had boarded this flight alone. She was not searching for headlines or public attention. She was searching for the truth. A younger flight attendant standing several rows away looked toward the passenger manifest displayed on her tablet. Something about the reservation seemed familiar, but before she could check more carefully, another crew member approached the aisle after noticing the growing delay. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. The lead flight attendant answered immediately. "The passenger appears to be confused about her seating assignment." Vanessa smiled politely. "Interesting choice of words. My boarding pass has not changed since I received it." The second crew member extended his hand. "May I see your ticket?" Vanessa handed it over without hesitation. He scanned the barcode once, frowned slightly, then scanned it again. The device paused for a brief moment before refreshing. He looked at the screen, then quickly locked it without saying anything. "Please wait here while we verify your reservation," he said carefully. "Of course," Vanessa replied. Verification should always come before conclusions. Around them, passengers continued watching with growing curiosity. A businessman seated near the aisle quietly shook his head as though convinced the outcome had already been decided. An older woman by the window closed her novel and studied Vanessa's composed expression instead. She noticed something the others had missed. This was not the face of someone hoping to avoid embarrassment. It was the face of someone patiently observing every decision being made. Outside the aircraft, the jet bridge remained connected as boarding slowed to a standstill. Inside, the first-class cabin had become something entirely different from a place of travel. Without anyone realizing it, it had become a test of judgment, professionalism, and character, and every passing second was revealing far more about the people making the decisions than about the woman quietly waiting beside seat 2 Alpha. The second crew member looked down at his handheld scanner once more, hoping the next refresh would produce an answer simple enough to end the growing delay. Instead, the screen displayed the same reservation number, the same seat assignment, and the same passenger name. He hesitated just long enough for the lead flight attendant to notice. "What does it say?" she asked. He looked up without fully answering. "The system is taking longer than expected to synchronize." Vanessa remained composed. "Can it confirm my reservation is invalid?" The crew member paused. "Not at this time." Vanessa nodded gently. "Can it confirm that it is valid?" Another silence followed. "Not at this time." She smiled politely. "Then we are both waiting for the same answer." The lead flight attendant stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "We cannot continue delaying an entire flight over one passenger. Please step aside while we finish boarding." Vanessa did not argue. "If the information has not been verified, what exactly am I stepping aside for?" The question hung in the air unanswered. A businessman seated across the aisle quietly leaned toward another passenger. "She is making this far more complicated than necessary." Before the other man could respond, an elderly gentleman wearing a retired airline captain's lapel pin slowly looked up from his newspaper. Actually, he said in a calm voice, the complicated part began when assumptions arrived before verification. Several nearby passengers turned toward him. The cabin had quietly divided into two groups. Some believed the crew had to be correct simply because they wore uniforms. Others were beginning to wonder why every request seemed directed at the passenger instead of the reservation system. Near the galley, the younger flight attendant finally reopened the passenger manifest on her tablet. This time she entered the confirmation number manually instead of using the automatic search. Her expression changed almost immediately. She blinked once, checked the information again, then compared it with the boarding pass she had briefly seen earlier. Every detail matched perfectly. Seat 2 Alpha. Vanessa Brooks. Confirmed. She looked toward the lead flight attendant, uncertain whether to interrupt. Professional hierarchy urged silence. Her conscience urged something different. Meanwhile, a gate agent stepped through the aircraft door after receiving a request from the cabin crew. "Do we have a boarding issue?" she asked. The lead flight attendant answered without hesitation. "Possible seating discrepancy." Vanessa quietly corrected her. "Possible verification discrepancy." The gate agent accepted the boarding pass and carefully examined every line. Flight number. Date. Gate. Confirmation code. Seat assignment. Nothing appeared unusual. She handed the document back with a thoughtful expression. "Everything looks consistent," she admitted. "I recommend we contact operations before asking the passenger to leave the cabin." The suggestion seemed reasonable, yet the lead flight attendant remained unconvinced. "We can resolve this ourselves." The retired captain slowly folded his newspaper and spoke again. "Good service is never measured by how quickly you reach a conclusion. It is measured by how carefully you reach the right one." No one answered him. Outside the windows, airport service vehicles continued moving beneath the afternoon sun as if nothing unusual was happening. Inside the first-class cabin, every additional minute exposed something far more important than a boarding delay. It revealed how easily confidence could replace evidence and how difficult it became for people to reconsider their first impression once they had already convinced themselves they were right. Vanessa noticed every reaction without judging anyone. She had boarded this aircraft searching for honest answers, and with every passing moment, the airline was providing them one decision at a time. The younger flight attendant could no longer ignore what she was seeing on her tablet. She took a slow breath, stepped forward, and spoke carefully enough to respect her senior colleague while remaining faithful to the facts. "I checked the reservation manually. The boarding pass matches the passenger manifest. Seat 2 Alpha is assigned to Ms. Vanessa Brooks." For the first time since the confrontation began, complete silence settled over the front of the cabin. The lead flight attendant glanced at the tablet but did not immediately reach for it. Instead, she answered with a confidence that sounded more like habit than certainty. "There must be another explanation." The younger attendant looked back at the screen. "I verified the confirmation number twice. The reservation is active. The fare class is correct. There are no upgrade conflicts and no duplicate assignments." Several passengers exchanged uncertain looks. The businessman who had quietly mocked Vanessa only minutes earlier shifted uncomfortably in his seat and stared out the window as though hoping the conversation would simply disappear. The retired captain gave a small nod, not because he enjoyed being proven right, but because professionalism had finally begun to replace assumption. The gate agent accepted the tablet from the younger flight attendant and reviewed the reservation herself. Every field matched perfectly. Passenger name. Flight number. Boarding group. Cabin assignment. Seat 2 Alpha. She slowly raised her eyes toward the lead flight attendant. "The documentation appears to be completely valid." Instead of ending the disagreement, the confirmation only deepened it. The lead flight attendant folded her arms once again. "Then operations needs to explain why this reservation feels unusual." Vanessa listened without interrupting. After a brief pause, she asked a simple question. "May I ask what exactly feels unusual?" No one answered immediately. The silence itself revealed more than any explanation could have. The elderly woman near the window quietly spoke for the first time. Sometimes what feels unusual has nothing to do with the person standing in front of us. Her words were gentle, yet they carried enough weight that several passengers lowered their eyes. The younger flight attendant looked at Vanessa with growing respect. "I apologize for the delay, Ms. Brooks. I believe your seat assignment is correct." Vanessa offered a warm smile. "Thank you for checking the information before reaching your conclusion. That is all anyone can ask." The younger attendant smiled back, though her relief was short-lived. The lead flight attendant was not ready to let the situation end. "Before anyone takes a seat, I want station operations to review this personally." The gate agent hesitated. "We already have the reservation, the manifest, and the boarding record." "Then we verify one more time," the lead attendant insisted. Vanessa quietly studied each face around her. She was no longer watching a disagreement about an airline seat. She was watching how an organization responded when evidence challenged an assumption that had already taken root. Some people adjusted their thinking as soon as new facts appeared. Others searched for additional reasons to defend their original judgment. That difference fascinated her far more than the delay itself. Outside, boarding had nearly stopped completely as passengers waited inside the jet bridge for instructions. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere had changed. Curiosity had replaced confidence. Whispered conversations became quieter. Even those who had remained silent from the beginning now seemed to understand that this moment was becoming larger than a routine boarding issue. Vanessa glanced once toward the cockpit door, then back toward the entrance of the aircraft. She remained calm, patient, and completely unshaken because she had learned years ago that character revealed itself most clearly when facts challenged first impressions. None of the people surrounding her realized that the real evaluation had never been about whether she belonged in seat 2 Alpha. It was about whether the people responsible for serving others were willing to let truth become more important than assumption. The lead flight attendant looked toward the open aircraft door where impatient passengers were beginning to ask why boarding had stopped. Her jaw tightened before she turned back to Vanessa. "Until station operations completes another review, I am asking you to step out of the first-class cabin." Her voice remained controlled, but the decision was unmistakable. Vanessa held her boarding pass without lowering her eyes. "Are you asking me to leave because my reservation is invalid?" The flight attendant hesitated for only a fraction of a second. "I am asking you to cooperate while we investigate." Vanessa nodded thoughtfully. "That is a different answer." The gate agent shifted her weight uneasily. She already knew the reservation had been verified, yet the conversation had moved beyond facts. It had become about defending an earlier judgment. Around the cabin, passengers watched in complete silence. Even those who had initially sided with the crew now seemed uncertain. The retired captain quietly removed his reading glasses. "When the evidence has already been confirmed," he said calmly, continuing to question the passenger instead of the process sends a message. No one challenged him. Vanessa slowly looked through the cabin before taking one small step backward, not in surrender, but to create space for everyone to think. As she stood near the aircraft entrance, an old memory returned with remarkable clarity. She was 12 years old, sitting beside her mother in a crowded airport terminal. They had arrived early, dressed neatly, holding confirmed tickets for a family visit. A gate employee had repeatedly questioned whether they were standing in the correct boarding line while allowing other travelers to pass without interruption. Vanessa remembered the confusion on her younger face and the quiet dignity with which her mother responded. After they finally reached their seats, her mother had looked out the window and gently said, "Never allow someone else's assumptions to decide how you see yourself. One day, if you have the opportunity, make the experience better for the next person." Those words had followed Vanessa through every stage of her life. They echoed during her first internship, her first board meeting, her first executive appointment, and eventually as she built one of the most respected technology companies serving the aviation industry. Success had never erased prejudice. It had simply changed where she encountered it. That was why she believed systems mattered more than speeches. Fair procedures protected everyone, especially those who entered a room carrying invisible assumptions placed upon them by others. The memory faded as the present returned. The younger flight attendant quietly approached Vanessa. "I am truly sorry for how this has unfolded," she said softly. Vanessa offered her another reassuring smile. "You chose to verify the facts. Never lose that habit." Before the younger attendant could respond, the lead flight attendant received a call through her headset. She listened briefly, nodded once, then looked toward the gate agent. "Station operations wants additional confirmation before boarding continues." The gate agent frowned slightly. "Additional confirmation of what?" No answer came immediately. Vanessa noticed the uncertainty spreading through every member of the crew. The issue was no longer whether she belonged in Seat 2 Alpha. The issue was that no one wanted to admit the first assumption had been wrong. Vanessa lowered her eyes to the phone resting quietly inside her travel bag. She had hoped the situation would resolve itself through professionalism alone. She had given the process every opportunity to correct itself. But as the minutes continued passing and the aircraft remained motionless at the gate, she realized the lesson her mother had given her all those years ago demanded more than patience. Sometimes dignity required allowing the truth to reach people from a place they could no longer ignore. Vanessa slowly reached into her travel bag and removed a slim black smartphone. There was no dramatic gesture, no raised voice, and no attempt to command attention. In fact, most of the passengers assumed she was calling a family member to explain the delay. The lead flight attendant watched with folded arms. "Ma'am, if you need additional assistance after leaving the aircraft, customer service will be happy to help you." Vanessa looked at her calmly. "I am sure someone will." She unlocked the phone, selected a single contact without scrolling, and placed the call. The line connected almost immediately. "Good afternoon, Ms. Brooks," a composed voice answered. "I apologize for interrupting," Vanessa said in the same steady tone she had maintained since boarding. "I need you to activate Executive Review Protocol 7. There was a brief pause. "May I confirm this request is based on a live operational observation?" "Yes," Vanessa replied. "Confirmed personally. Location is Flight 724. Gate C18. Please preserve every operational record beginning 20 minutes before boarding." The voice on the other end became noticeably more formal. "Understood. Would you like regional leadership notified?" Vanessa looked toward the cabin, where the crew continued waiting for station operations to provide yet another explanation for a reservation that had already been verified several times. "Notify only those required by protocol," she answered. "And temporarily suspend outbound departures connected to this operational network until executive review confirms passenger treatment procedures have been secured." The reply came without hesitation. "Confirmed. Implementation begins immediately." Vanessa thanked the caller and ended the conversation. The entire exchange had lasted less than 30 seconds. She quietly returned the phone to her bag as though nothing unusual had happened. The lead flight attendant gave a faint smile that carried more skepticism than concern. "I hope they can help resolve your reservation." Vanessa answered politely. "I believe they will resolve something more important than my reservation." Before anyone could respond, the younger flight attendant noticed a notification appear on her company tablet. She opened it instinctively, then frowned. Another notification arrived seconds later, followed by a third. At nearly the same moment, the gate agent's company phone vibrated repeatedly. She glanced at the screen, her expression changing from mild curiosity to visible confusion. "That is strange," she whispered. The second crew member checked his handheld device. "Operations just issued a network advisory." The lead flight attendant extended her hand. "Let me see." Before he could pass it over, another alert appeared. Across the airport, inside a brightly lit operations control center filled with rows of large digital displays tracking aircraft movements across the country, supervisors began looking toward one another as identical notifications appeared across multiple workstations. Conversation stopped. Team leaders stepped away from their desks. Secure internal communication channels activated almost simultaneously. No emergency had been declared, yet a level of executive authorization rarely seen during routine operations had just entered the system. Back inside the aircraft, passengers remained unaware of the wider picture unfolding beyond the terminal windows. They simply noticed crew members exchanging increasingly uncertain glances as one device after another continued receiving priority messages. The retired captain quietly observed the unfolding scene with thoughtful eyes. He recognized the difference between an ordinary operational update and instructions carrying executive authority. Vanessa remained exactly where she had been standing all along, calm, patient, and completely composed. She had not made the call to punish anyone or to prove her importance. She had made it because systems only improved when truth was allowed to travel through every level of an organization, and within the next few minutes, that truth would reach far beyond a single aircraft waiting at gate C-18. The first alert reached the captain before anyone in the cabin understood what it meant. A soft chime echoed from the cockpit, followed almost immediately by another. Inside the flight deck, both pilots exchanged puzzled looks as a priority message appeared across the operational display. Executive Review Protocol 7. Temporary Operational Hold. Await further authorization. The captain frowned. In more than 20 years of flying, he had only seen that level of instruction during major executive audits or significant system reviews. He picked up the secure communication handset and contacted operations. Before anyone answered, another message appeared, this time marked with the highest internal priority. Across the airport, the same sequence unfolded with remarkable speed. Dispatch coordinators paused active departures. Ground controllers received updated instructions. Gate supervisors watched their screens refresh as departure statuses changed one after another. Aircraft that had been preparing to push back remained parked at their gates. Crews waiting for clearance were instructed to stand by. Within minutes, 152 outbound flights connected through the airline's operational network entered temporary hold status. No alarms sounded. No panic spread through the terminals. Everything remained orderly, yet the entire operation slowed with unusual precision. Inside the operations control center, dozens of large monitors shifted from green departure indicators to amber review notifications. Team leaders immediately gathered around the central command station while senior executives joined secure conference lines. One supervisor quietly asked, "Who authorized Protocol 7?" Another checked the authorization log before answering in disbelief. Direct executive authorization. Identity protected until review begins. Back inside the aircraft, the younger flight attendant stared at her tablet as notification after notification continued arriving. "All connected departures are being paused," she whispered. The second crew member looked at his own device and slowly nodded. "This is not affecting only our flight." The gate agent checked her company phone again. "Regional Operations is requesting that no passenger movement occur until executive instructions are completed." The lead flight attendant suddenly felt the confidence she had carried since boarding began to disappear. She looked toward Vanessa, who remained standing exactly where she had been from the beginning, holding nothing except her travel bag and boarding pass. "Did you know this was going to happen?" she asked quietly. Vanessa answered with complete honesty. "I knew the review process would begin. I did not know how quickly your organization would respond." The retired captain smiled faintly. "That is the difference between influence and authority," he said almost to himself. Around the cabin, passengers who had once watched with curiosity now watched with genuine disbelief. The businessman who had dismissed Vanessa earlier slowly leaned back into his seat, realizing the situation had become far larger than anyone could have imagined. Even the elderly woman near the window looked toward Vanessa with quiet admiration, not because of power, but because she had remained respectful through every unnecessary challenge. Another secure call reached the captain. He listened carefully before replying, "Understood. We will maintain our current position until executive leadership joins the review." He ended the call and stepped out of the cockpit for the first time since boarding had stopped. Looking across the silent first-class cabin, he addressed his crew with measured professionalism. Everyone will remain exactly where they are. Senior leadership is assuming direct oversight of this matter. The words settled over the cabin like complete stillness. No one spoke. No one reached for another explanation. Every assumption that had seemed so certain only minutes earlier had been replaced by a single undeniable reality. Somewhere beyond the aircraft, people with the highest level of authority had decided that what happened inside this cabin mattered enough to temporarily pause an operation stretching across 152 departing flights, and for the first time since Vanessa Brooks had stepped onto the aircraft, every person around her began wondering not whether she belonged in Seat 2 Alpha, but who she truly was. Less than 3 minutes after the captain announced that senior leadership had assumed direct oversight, the secure communication panel near the cockpit chimed again. This time the captain answered immediately, listened without interrupting, then straightened his posture before replying, "Yes, sir. She is here. Everything will remain exactly as it is until your instructions are completed." He ended the call and turned toward the cabin with an expression none of the crew had seen before. It was not confusion anymore. It was respect mixed with unmistakable urgency. The captain walked directly toward Vanessa and stopped a few feet away. "Ms. Brooks," he said politely, "our Executive Operations Center has requested that I personally thank you for your patience. They also asked me to inform you that members of the Board Oversight Committee and our Chief Executive Officer are joining the review at this moment." The lead flight attendant felt the color leave her face. She looked from the captain to Vanessa, searching for an explanation that no longer existed. The younger flight attendant quietly lowered her tablet. She already understood that this had never been an ordinary passenger dispute. The captain continued speaking. "Our Chief Executive Officer asked me to relay his apology before speaking with you directly. He emphasized that the operational hold was initiated because your observations are considered part of an executive service audit." Several passengers looked at Vanessa with complete disbelief. The businessman who had dismissed her earlier slowly removed his glasses and whispered, "Executive audit?" The retired captain answered without taking his eyes off Vanessa. "That explains everything." Moments later, the secure cabin phone rang again. The captain answered, listened briefly, then respectfully carried the handset toward Vanessa. "The Chief Executive Officer would like to speak with you personally." Vanessa accepted the phone with a warm smile. "Good afternoon," she said calmly. The voice on the other end carried both professionalism and genuine concern. "Ms. Brooks, on behalf of our entire organization, I sincerely apologize for what you experienced today. We appreciate your decision to activate Executive Review Protocol 7 instead of allowing this matter to remain hidden. The board has already begun reviewing every recorded interaction connected to this flight." Vanessa thanked him before replying, "My purpose has never been to embarrass anyone. I only wanted to understand whether our shared commitment to treating every passenger with dignity was reaching the front line." "We understand," the Chief Executive Officer replied. "That is exactly why your partnership has been so valuable to this company." After ending the conversation, Vanessa returned the handset to the captain. The cabin remained completely silent. Finally, the captain addressed everyone present. "For those who may not be aware, Ms. Vanessa Brooks is the founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Integrated Systems, the technology company responsible for the operational platform that coordinates passenger verification, logistics, and departure management throughout our airline network. She also serves as one of our largest strategic partners and sits on the Independent Executive Oversight Council responsible for evaluating customer experience." The words settled over the cabin with astonishing weight. The lead flight attendant lowered her eyes, realizing that the woman she had repeatedly questioned had never needed special treatment. She had only expected the same fair treatment promised to every traveler. Vanessa looked gently at the crew before speaking. "Please do not remember today because of my position. Remember it because none of you knew my position when the first decision was made. That is the only moment that truly mattered." No one argued. No one searched for another explanation. The truth had arrived not through status or pride, but through facts, accountability, and the quiet strength of a woman who understood that real leadership was measured not by how loudly authority was displayed, but by how faithfully it protected the dignity of people who had no reason to expect special recognition. The cabin remained silent for several long moments after the captain finished speaking. No announcement could erase what had already happened, and Vanessa never expected one to. She simply looked around the first-class cabin with the same calm expression she had carried from the moment she first stepped aboard. The lead flight attendant slowly stepped forward. The confidence that had once filled her voice had been replaced by humility. "Ms. Brooks," she said sincerely, "I owe you an apology. I allowed my first impression to become my decision before I allowed the facts to guide me. I am truly sorry." Vanessa accepted the words with a gentle nod. "Thank you for saying that. Accountability is where improvement begins." The younger flight attendant quietly smiled, relieved that honesty had finally found its place in the conversation. The retired captain looked toward the rest of the passengers before speaking one final time. "Every airline teaches us how to operate an aircraft. Character is what teaches us how to serve people." Several passengers nodded without saying a word. Even the businessman who had quietly mocked Vanessa earlier stood from his seat before she sat down. "Ms. Brooks," he said, avoiding excuses, "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I appreciate the lesson, even though I wish I had not needed it." Vanessa smiled warmly. "We all make first impressions. The important question is whether we are willing to reconsider them when new facts appear." The gate agent soon received another notification confirming that executive review protocol had been completed. Across the airline's operational network, departure holds were lifted in an orderly sequence. One by one, airport control systems returned to normal. Flight crews resumed preparations. Gates reopened. Aircraft began pushing back from terminals across the country. The temporary pause had accomplished exactly what it was designed to do. It protected the integrity of the review before normal operations resumed. The captain received final clearance, thanked operations, and turned toward the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will now continue boarding and prepare for departure." This time, there were no whispers as Vanessa walked the short distance to seat 2 Alpha. The lead flight attendant personally placed her travel bag in the overhead compartment before asking quietly, "May I offer you anything before departure?" Vanessa smiled. "Only one thing." "Of course," the flight attendant replied. Vanessa looked gently around the cabin before answering. "Please greet the next passenger with the same respect you are showing me now, even if you never learn who they are." The flight attendant nodded with tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "I will." Vanessa settled comfortably into her seat and looked out the window as the aircraft slowly pushed away from the gate. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the runway, reminding her of another airport many years earlier where her mother had quietly chosen dignity over resentment. She wished her mother could have seen this moment, not because a powerful executive had been recognized, but because an important conversation had finally reached the people capable of creating lasting change. As the aircraft climbed into the wide American sky, Vanessa closed her eyes for a brief moment, knowing that true leadership was never about making people fear authority. It was about building systems where fairness did not depend on titles, appearances, or assumptions. Respect should arrive before introductions. Dignity should never require proof. And the strongest leaders are not remembered because they reveal how much power they possess, but because they remind everyone that every person deserves to be treated with equal humanity long before anyone discovers who they really are.